content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families. Imagine Austin, Texas, 1884, a burgeoning city gripped by fear as a ruthless killer stalks the night, leaving a trail of terror and a death in his wake. Over the course of a single year, 8 innocent lives were brutally taken, and the identity of their murderer remains a haunted mystery to this day. Join me as we dig up and dust off this cold case with the grisly details and the heinous crimes, and explore the lives of the victims, and delve into the theories that suggest maybe a chilling connection to another infamous killer, Jack the Ripper. So join me with my special guest, Greg Lawson. Pour yourself a glass of your favorite wine, and let's uncover the dark secrets of the Midnight Assassin. It's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. Well, this is going to be a mind-blowing episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot, and we're going to go back 200 years to Austin, Texas. Now, there was a serial killer that went through Austin, Texas from 1884 to 1885. How could somebody in the dead of night kill this many people and not get caught, not be seen? So I figured I would reach out to an expert, Greg Lawson, who has traveled over 40 countries and he's spent over 30 years in law enforcement being a professional investigator. He has been a police academy instructor and a college educator. And I figured he would have the best. And he lives in Austin, Texas. I forgot about that. Yes, he lives in Austin, Texas, and he's great. And he's an historian as well. He loves to look back at history. So without further ado, Greg, welcome to the show.
Hey, I have transported myself back to 1884, and I'm here in front of the Austin, or actually it's called the Texas State Lunatic Asylum. You're welcome.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, you're on my husband's show. You're on the news, the P60 News, every Wednesday on the Paranormal 60 Network, and yep, exactly, right there. But and you delve into the paranormal a lot, whether it's UFOs, Bigfoot, cryptids and things like that. But you also know a lot about true crime itself. And I've always said that true crime and paranormal usually are hand in hand, because when you go to a haunted place, you're usually the spirits in the place were killed, murdered, tortured, something traumatic happened to them. So there's always that tie. But with this, I've never heard of the Midnight Assassin. So I want to learn along with the listeners. So without further ado, Greg, why don't you just start? I mean, this guy obviously had a couple screws loose, but how did he go through Austin, Texas for a year killing people with an axe?
Cops didn't understand that there was such thing as serial killers at that point.
Oh.
Most of the serial killers up into the late 1880s, early 1900s were typically known as warriors. They were soldiers in the United States Army, or they were you know, Braves in Comanche groups. They were actually a lot of these guys were aggrandized for what they did. Their societies actually allowed them and encouraged them to do what they were doing. Then there's these other people
Hmm.
try to stay quiet and try to stay hidden. You know, there's that old the old legend of, let's say, werewolf,
Yeah.
where a normal man
Hmm.
who could have a family, could have kids, you know, be a prominent part of his community,
Hmm.
would suddenly turn into this bloodthirsty, raving maniac, right? And would
Right.
kill his whole family. You always remember, for the most part, werewolves kill the people they love.
Right.
Well, there's things that human beings do that we think in our mind and we try to justify stuff. How
Right.
can a normal guy have killed his wife and all of his kids? He must have turned into a werewolf to do this. And he's
Right.
covered in blood when he wakes up in the morning and he's naked. And they're like, oh my God, that's what happened.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a good history of serial killers as back as far as we can look at. So we just didn't recognize it as that, like some hidden guy that's just going to go out and kill people for his own
Hmm.
motive. So
Now,
the cops didn't realize it.
okay, so as these murders were happening through that span that year, were they connecting them? Were they saying, I think the killer of this crime scene could possibly be the killer at the one 2 weeks ago? You know what I mean? Like, were they
Right.
at all alluding and tying those things together at all?
So I believe Sheriff Hornsby, he was the elected sheriff of Travis County at the time. I believe he had some theories because he wasn't that involved in the investigations. The investigations were primarily conducted by the city marshal's office or the city police department. And
Uh-huh.
at that time, the guys that were in charge of that, there's no police academy back then. There wasn't a
Right.
justice department that you could go to the local university in 1884 and get your degree in criminal justice or police science or whatever. Um,
Mhm.
so we oftentimes judge what happened in the past on our contemporary knowledge, which our contemporary knowledge we're getting all the time from just discussions with as many people as we talk to on our cell phones, Google, movies, all this stuff. Nobody had that back then. They had a
Right.
paper maybe they had some books, but they weren't written about that. So
Well,
imagine not knowing anything and just some girl gets murdered over here. Oh wow, that's horrible. Who did it? Her boyfriend,
yeah.
right? Her boyfriend, or was she at a bar that night? Did somebody follow her home? There's these local connections that you go to, and you automatically point fingers that way. In
Yes.
this case, there were certain reasons why people in the United States do not know of this serial killer who, at the time, these articles were written and sent out through the AP. They were sent out through teletype, and it
Yeah.
was nationwide. Everyone knew what was going in Austin at that time. The
Wow.
problem is when they basically professed to have had it solved, it just
Mhm.
went away. Everybody just kind of shrugged their shoulders and it just kind of went away. Primarily, because in Austin, you don't want to advertise that you have a serial killer in your town, right?
Right, especially when you're trying to make your city become more, booming city and, people moving in, bringing jobs, businesses there. So, yeah, you don't it's
You
not a
don't want that.
selling point.
It's weird. It's weird like that. And so when you look at that sort of stuff, and you look at the mayor of Austin at the time and the city council, city aldermen is what they called them. Um,
Mhm.
all of them were trying to bury this. And
Yeah.
there were certain reasons that we'll get to why if you're listening to this for the first time and you're like, you know, the Midnight Assassin, also known as
Mhm.
Austin Axe Murder, also known as the Servant Girl Annihilator, also known as, I mean, they had multiple names for them, but there's a
Right.
reason why. So,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Well, can you kind of start where the Midnight Assassin started? Was his first did he start just on Christmas Eve?
Yeah. So he started it actually on December 30th, 1884. So it
Okay.
was New Year's Eve
Okay,
is when
gotcha.
he did his first. And the funny thing is in Austin today, I've done a bunch of filming on this,
Mhm.
and I haven't put it together. I was gonna, create a little documentary on it. Uh, True Detectives and some other people have kind of delved off into it. Skip Hollingsworth wrote the book, um, The Midnight Assassin, and it's probably the best out of all of the books that are written about that. There's about 4 books written
Okay.
about serial killers or the serial killer. And Skip Hollingsworth is spot on. But little listeners, he missed 2 things, and you're not going to find out
Ooh.
in this podcast what they are. You're going to have to read my
Oh,
book.
come on.
I know, I know. I'm not going to do
You're
it. Not
such
going to
a
tell you.
tease.
I know it's crazy,
Jeez.
crazy.
What?
So
Okay, so
when
first
you
his first kill.
yeah, when you look at where he first his first murder that we know of, right? Because we don't know whether this guy was doing this before,
Mhm.
and they just didn't catch up to him. Is now where in Austin, Texas, is a really prominent part of Austin, next to a
Mhm.
very famous bookstore and um, Central Market. It's the back of Central Market is where this house used to be. And her name was Molly
Okay.
Smith. Molly Smith.
Okay.
And she was asleep with Walter Spencer, who was her boyfriend, and they slept in a little servant's quarters right behind the house. Now,
Okay.
a gentleman named Tom Chalmers was a hardcore cowboy, and he was staying at the main house while
Mhm.
his sister and his brother-in-law had gone to Galveston for something, and he was staying at the
Okay.
house that night. And in the middle of the night, he heard some banging downstairs. He got up, went out there, and there is a black man standing in the middle of the living room, bleeding profusely, asking for help.
Oh,
And Tom
no.
Chalmers, the last thing Tom Chalmers wants in his house is somebody bleeding, and probably the more last thing that he wants is a black man in his house. So
Yeah.
he very quickly he didn't kill him. It's surprising that he didn't, but
Mhm.
he basically said, "It's none of my business. You need to get out of my house. Get out of here."
Oh. Ugh.
So poor Walter Spencer, yeah,
Oh,
had
cringe.
basically had basically woken up almost scalped. His head was
Oh
so
god.
damaged,
Ooh.
and he saw the blood everywhere. And he got up and he immediately started to look for Molly, and he's basically stumbling around. Now, the crazy part about this particular night
Uh-huh.
in Austin, Texas, December 30th, 1884, is it was snowing. And it was
Oh.
super cold. Lots of cattle died during this
Um,
particular freeze. And so he just sent old Walter Spencer back out on the street and said, you need to go put some bandage on that head and get out of my house. Yeah.
oh my gosh. Oh, how rude.
Yeah. Well, like I
Oh,
said, to this day,
yeah.
you wake up in the middle of the night in that situation would be a pretty bad situation. But still,
Yes.
back then, Tom Chalmers could have shot him right there and not thought twice about it. Nobody would have done anything about it.
Exactly, yeah, and, you just don't have especially back then with the way the race climate was at the
Mhm.
time, Black people were not allowed in the main house, and if you were in the main house and they didn't know you or you weren't supposed to be there, well, you were gonna get a whooping or something, and obviously, yeah, he coulda gotten away with it, no problem.
Yep.
Okay, so Molly was his kind of, like, first kill, and she was a
Yeah.
servant girl. So what happened with her? Like, what did his crime scenes look like? Like, what was a pattern that he had starting with Molly and then working his way down to the 8 people that he butchered basically
Right.
with an axe?
So, and that was the thing, right? Nobody was really paying much of attention. The officer that responded to the scene was a new cop. He didn't know anything. He just, hey,
Okay.
you want to be a cop? Here's a badge. Go stop people from fighting and go solve problems, right? So
Mhm.
he showed up. He sees this, and they check the servant house, and it is a
Mhm.
mess, as you can imagine. And they looked around, and there was another man that was walking down the street that actually found Molly's body, and made notification. And Dr. Steiner, who was a local doctor at the hospital there, was actually there, and he actually made the call to the police to get them to respond. Molly was just laying out in the snow by the outhouse.
Mhm.
She some thought, well, maybe she was going to the bathroom that night, and that's where he got her. And no, the crime scene was in the small servants' quarters. Both of them were assaulted, both Molly and Walter, and Walter was
Mhm.
left for dead, but he recovered. He recovered enough to where the police just threw him in jail, because
Oh.
back then it's like, who killed her? Well, who else would
Mhm.
have a motive for killing this woman? Nobody except for Walter. They got into a fight, and she hit him over the head with something. That's why he's bleeding, and so he killed her. That was pretty much
Right.
what they figured. But the crime scene was horrible, blood everywhere. She was laying on her back. Her head was split wide open. He
Mhm.
had he had violated her after her death because of the way that she was positioned when he left. He
Mhm.
left her in that position,
Okay.
and she was exposed. Her internal organs were exposed, and in something like this, you pick up the body, you tell the family to clean up the house, you throw Walter in jail, and that's pretty much, you got your case solved, right?
Right.
The autopsies on uh, these women, the first six, actually the first five women and one man, um,
Mhm.
were basically cursory autopsies. They wouldn't be like what considered autopsy today. The
Yeah.
county physician would just kind of take a look at the body, measure some things out, describe the wounds, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Um, Not much was done. They took Molly Smith's body to the dead room at the hospital, and that's where the doctor reviewed her there.
Okay.
And of the hacking, crushing wounds to her head, they figured out it was
Mhm.
an axe or a hatchet. But there was
Okay.
also another penetrating wound. Now, the
Okay.
interesting thing about this, yeah, I want to take you back to 1884. Police did not do reports. They didn't write reports. There was a thing
Okay.
called testimony, right?
Mhm.
And you
Yeah.
got called to court and you made your testimony. Well,
Okay.
luckily, somewhere along the line, somebody figured out that people's testimony sometimes changes from the day the crime happened to the time they go to court, for
Right.
various reasons. So they started having them write reports so that
Oh.
testimony would be tied back to the report. Um, in this case, uh, they were pretty smart about it, because the only people that were doing quote unquote reports of
Mhm.
these things were the media. Everything that we know about servant girl murders in Austin basically comes from the media. It comes from the Historical Society, keeping track of the Austin Statesman and other
Mhm.
newspapers who the reporters wrote and described the scene.
Right, and
So,
when you look at those old news articles, they're very much detailed in those articles too, more than what we get today if anybody reads a newspaper. But when you read an
oh yeah,
article online, they don't put the grisly details, but back then, yeah, it was like a police report. They would put every detail at that crime scene in that article and just print, so yeah, so what we all know of the Midnight Assassin is what was recorded at the time on newspapers.
yeah. When people
Mhm.
talk about First Amendment rights in the United States, we really do not have total First Amendment rights.
Mhm.
We don't. And there's etiquette, right? You could write something horrible about somebody's demise or whatever. Um, there are some podcasts out there that
Mhm.
sensationalize things, We had one recently that came into Austin for a fairly recent series of murders that happened, spree
Mhm.
murder that happened. And they're saying the place is haunted and all this other stuff. Well, I have family members contacting me going, what are they doing? Why are they talking about, my family members like this?
Right.
And that's one of those real precarious things when I've been doing, working, criminal justice in Austin for 32 years. You end up meeting a lot of victims, a lot of families and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes keeping in touch. So, um,
Mhm.
but back then they sensationalized as much as they could so they could sell as many papers as they could.
Oh, right.
And try to scare people because that's media is very good with doing that. Um,
Mhm. Well,
so
okay,
yeah,
so well, speaking of the media then, so you said that the Midnight Assassin had so many different monikers. What's the reason behind all the different ones? Is it because of the killings? They weren't tying them all together to one killer, so they were just giving every murderer a different name, like a hurricane? I don't know.
yeah, that's right. That's kind of so each reporter would do their own take on it and
Okay.
and assign him some sort of name or whatever. But also kind of what you said, they weren't putting it together. There
Mhm.
were groups of people that were complaining to the city alderman and to the mayor that why aren't we doing more? Because
Mhm.
they felt that it was gangs doing this, that there were groups of people that were running through Austin. You got to go back to 1884 and look at Austin. Um, it was a boomtown. It
Yep.
was called or known as the Athens of the South. Or the Athens of the West. It was. It got a new university, got the state of the art Texas State Lunatic Asylum.
Mhm.
They had big theaters. I mean, there was all kinds of stuff going on. We had actually had an ice cream shop that had air conditioning in 1884.
What?
Yeah, yeah,
Air conditioning?
where they froze the ice cream, they also would vent that cold air out into the area where everybody would sit. And
Oh,
they
that place
actually,
was
it
popular.
was really popular. Crazy part is there was a couple of cowboys that went in there because they just wanted to get cool air. And
Mhm.
they were sitting there and they were drunk. They were out drinking, and there were two local ladies that were there eating their ice cream, and one of the cowboys was fooling around with his gun and accidentally shot and killed this woman. She was a
Oh,
philanthropist here in Austin. And that was all kind of about that same time. Austin was crazy here. There was all
yeah.
kinds of stuff going on, but there was a lot of progress going on. So Molly
Oh.
Smith, um,
Mhm.
they actually kind of did a really good job. Sheriff Hornsby at the time, Malcolm
Mhm.
Hornsby, he did a really good job at kind of keeping some of the crime scene a secret. He
Oh,
knew that if that kind of information would get out, then there could be some copycat stuff going on, right? If somebody wanted to kill somebody,
right.
you just go and make it look like the Midnight Assassin did it. The interesting thing is when he commits his crimes, for the most part, is on or very close, very, very close to the full moon. And he did this late at
Hmm.
night, 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting. And these things would happen, relatively right after the bars would close.
Okay.
And so, and
Right.
the restaurants, would close, which is another kind of correlating factor. Also, with a full moon, you could see pretty good in Austin. They had
Right.
just gotten about a block worth of electric street or electricity to some of the buildings in about a block. So there were some
Okay.
electric lights that you would have to change every day because they burn out in a few hours. But for the most part, it was pitch black at night.
Right.
So it's
So
interesting
he
that he either did the werewolf thing, is like, on the full moon, I'm going to go out and do my killings.
Yeah.
or it was just practical because he could see better.
Okay. Now, so with each victim that he got to, he leaving any type of calling card? Did anybody pick up on anything like that, or was he just kind of mutilating bodies and then just leaving the crime scene a chaotic mess and just go on to the next one? And another thing too, I find interesting is that he obviously blended in with society, so he could have been some prominent guy during the day, and at night, yeah, his inner werewolf would come out. But his victims, were all of his victims African American women? Like, did he focus on kind of, um, the lower class people, the servants and things like that? And it makes sense that he would kill around the times bars let out, because at the time, people would walk home drunk. They're very vulnerable and they're not going to fight back like somebody who would be sober. So, it makes sense that he would target people that were, two sheets to the wind and, wobbling down the street at night trying to get home.
Yeah. So in this case, that's one of the reasons why most Americans don't know anything about this. They know all about Jack the Ripper. They
Right,
know
right.
nothing about this. I mean, okay. Before I answer your question, let me throw this at you. So,
Okay.
the canonical 5 murders that happened that were specifically attributed to Jack the Ripper were
Okay.
prostitutes.
Hmm.
You can infer, this is not popular, but you can infer that being a prostitute, hanging out on the street at 2 o'clock in the morning is inherently dangerous. You can
Hmm.
expect to be robbed, raped, beaten up, or killed uh,
Right.
doing what you're doing because you're putting yourself into a situation because of the way our laws are and it's illegal. You have to go underground to do your trade.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's pretty bad. How about
Right.
Austin, Texas? You're in your bed with your
Yeah.
doors locked, nice and snugly warm. Maybe you've put some rocks, in the in the stove to heat those rocks up and wrap them in a blanket. You put them in your bed and they're down
Oh.
at your feet and it's nice and toasty warm. You get to go to
Oh,
sleep
nice.
and then you wake up with an
Mhm.
axe in your head. That's
Right.
what he would do.
Oh.
His modus operandi would be going to a servant's quarters. He would
Okay.
take off his boots. He would then jimmy the lock, which is really easy in the 1880s,
Hmm.
or it wouldn't be locked at all. Most of these places aren't locked at all. Um,
Right.
every house had a stove or a fireplace, which means every house had a pile of wood or some coal,
Hmm.
maybe usually wood at this time. So if you have a pile of wood, what else do you have sitting there? An axe.
An axe,
So he would
exactly.
just take off his boots, reach over, get the axe, go inside the house real quiet, position himself, and get one good swing at the head. Once you got one
Oh,
good swing at the head, person is critically injured. They're not going to be able to defend
right.
themselves. And that's where kind of Malcolm Hornsby and some of the other ones, the police and the sheriff's office, were really smart by not letting some of the evidence out. They wouldn't tell the media certain things,
Okay.
and one of them was a penetrating wound to either side of the skull, just a little round wound to the
Really?
either side of the skull. Yeah, um, because a
Hmm.
woman's body is much easier to move when it has a handle sticking out of its head. So you take your ice pick that you use at your bar or at your restaurant that you normally carry
Oh.
around everywhere. Everybody knows it. And you hit them in the side of the head with it. And now you drag the
Hmm.
body out into the yard. He did that with all of them, drag them out in the yard under the moonlight and would rape them there, dead or alive. Whatever
Oh
happened.
my gosh.
If they weren't dead yet, he would kill them and have his way. Then he would
Hmm.
put his boots back on, drop the
Okay.
axe right there on scene, and leave. It was horrible. I don't know what's worse, the Jack the Ripper stuff or this stuff. You know,
I
you're at
I
home.
know,
You're not
right?
on the street going, God, I hope nothing happens tonight. I hope I make some money. No,
Right, you're at
not at all.
home sleeping, yeah, and it's just like,
Completely vulnerable.
"Hello."
Right.
Yeah, I
So,
don't know what it was about the 1800s, but it seems like everybody was throwing axes around, killing people, my goodness, jeez, it
well,
was
that's
a
the funny
weapon
thing.
of choice.
Even today, you look at the United States, what the weapon of choice is here, as far as firearms and that sort of stuff. You look at the
Yeah.
UK, firearms are illegal and they hardly have any homicides with that, but they have a ton of aggravated assaults with knives and axes and stuff like that. It's much
Oh,
higher
machetes.
than it is here in the United States. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Per capita, before somebody goes,
yeah.
it is not. It's a much smaller country. So per capita, their assaults are more prevalent with knives and blades.
Well, yeah, knives and yeah, because we bring the gun to the fight,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
bring
It's
the
like, all
knives,
right,
basically.
go home.
Okay.
Don't come yell at me.
Okay, so
Um,
he's like, yeah, this guy's just methodically just mutilating people, and he just like does what he wants to do and walks away. And I
yeah,
wonder if he's purposely using a weapon in the home each time. So he can't be caught with an axe because he could say, I don't even have an axe, or I don't even
I
have
I
the weapons.
I think that was probably a secondary motivation. I think the primary motivation is he knows axes are everywhere. Just pick one up, go
Yeah.
use it, and just leave it there because he doesn't want to take it with him, like you said.
Hmm.
Because Um, and and the other thing you can imagine, I don't know if you've ever had a small cut on your head, but it
Hmm.
bleeds a lot.
Yes, I know.
You can
Yeah.
imagine what these crime scenes looked like, um,
Hmm.
and how it would be all over him. He would be
Yeah.
walking through it as he's dragging the body out. It's running down his leg. Uh,
Hmm.
and yeah, so that ends up being part of what actually fingers the suspect and ends up kind of inadvertently everybody decides, okay, that's who was doing this. It's we figured it out. It's not
Okay, so
always
they
that true.
not always that true. So do
Mm.
you, so you don't put a lot of stock on who they pin all these murders on, is that correct? Is that what you're
I,
saying?
I do. There's no doubt in my mind that a gentleman named Nathan Elgin. He
Mhm.
was a cook and bar back at a local restaurant down on Congress Avenue.
Mhm.
He was a black man and was well known in that area. He knew those neighborhoods very well. He
Mhm.
frequented those neighborhoods. So, yes, people would have seen him. And spoiler alert, he would have been fairly easy to identify because you could just say, the tall black guy with the limp. Like, oh yeah, I know who that. I see that guy all
Right.
the time because he had something
Mhm.
wrong with his foot. He might have had a club foot
Okay.
or an injury to his foot.
Oh,
And in a couple of the crime scenes, Sheriff Hornsby noticed the bloody footprints because he would just walk right through the blood. He didn't care. He wasn't trying to be clean or anything.
yeah.
Uh, and one of the footprints looked different, like he walked on the side of his foot. It didn't look right, or
Okay,
maybe,
gotcha.
or maybe he was missing toes. Sheriff Hornsby, despite what the marshal's office was doing, Sheriff Hornsby actually went to one of the scenes and cut the floorboards out of the house, out of that bedroom, and saved those bloody footprints. What do you suppose they would go for at auction today? Some freaking
Right? The
lifted up
murderabilia, the
haunted.
floorboards, yeah,
I got haunted boards from
with bloody footprints on it.
yeah, got real DNA here. There's got to be a ghost somewhere.
So,
So
who do you who do you really have a strong feeling that was the murderer, that caused all these crimes? The
so
serial killer.
I think Nathan Elgin. I believe that Nathan killed Molly Smith. Um,
Okay.
I believe he killed Eliza Shelley. on May
Okay.
7th, 1883. I believe that he killed Mary Ramey, who was very young. She was 11.
Oh, jeez.
And he didn't spare anything to her either.
Mhm.
Her mother actually survived. Mary and her mom, Rebecca, actually
Mhm.
slept in the kitchen of the man that employed them as his servants. And Rebecca actually survived. So when Nathan Elgin came into that house, he whacked Mary in the head, he whacked Rebecca in the head, and then chose to take the little girl out into the yard. And it was just right down the street from the train depot. I mean, there were people right over there.
Oh gosh. Ugh.
And that happened. The
Mhm.
the crazy part was that Rebecca, there's multiple stories about this, and I've been researching this for probably 20 years. And I've only
Okay.
come up with two things that are different than what pretty much a majority of the other people have come up with, which primarily Skip Hollandsworth and some of the people that researched the original newspaper articles. There's not much more to find out, right? Everything's destroyed. All the
Right.
buildings that this happened in are gone. There's
Right.
no physical evidence that we know of. We don't know where the boards went to. I'm sure they went in the garbage. They threw
Uh-huh.
them out in the garbage after Nathan was said to be dead. They
Yep.
got rid of them.
Mhm.
So doing this kind of work requires a whole bunch of research, and I've sat in county archives and spent many hours looking at stuff that has nothing to do with servant girl murders. And in doing so, I found two things that were very interesting, and by God, something else happened, and it wasn't
Okay.
them. But after killing Mary,
Uh-huh.
he also went out right across the street from the University of Texas. So the University of Texas is a brand new university, and right across the street from what it was called Old Main, which was the main
Okay.
building of University of Texas that is not there anymore. Gracie Vance and Orange Washington were asleep in there, and that's the man that he killed. He killed Orange Washington. And then took
Okay.
Gracie, did the same thing with Gracie, drug her out into the backyard. Same thing, same MO on the injuries.
Okay.
And that was in September 28th, 1884 or 1885. And he kind of went
Okay.
quiet until Christmas Eve. And then
Okay.
Christmas Eve, he decided to do his stuff, so they say. But
Ooh.
the odd thing is he jumped races. All of a sudden that night he killed two white women, or so they say.
Oh, okay. That could
So
definitely
yeah,
flip the script.
yeah.
Yeah, 'cause
Susan Hancock.
mhm.
She was uh, a white woman that was married to a prominent home builder,
Okay.
and Moses Hancock, and they lived down right next to the river. And
Okay.
that night, think about Christmas Eve. There are plays going on. There's
Mhm.
singing, there's rivalry. There's revelry, not rivalry, revelry, partying. It was crazy. And by
Yeah.
this time, a year has gone by, and they have employed private security. They've hired more cops. They got tons of other aldermen walking the street. They got citizens on patrol that are walking the street. All this is going on.
Uh-huh.
And Susan Hancock's daughters went out that night to a party, and she was there with her husband.
Okay.
And she decided to sleep in her daughter's room. Her husband
Okay.
is drunk. He wakes up to screaming. He comes out, and Susan is laying outside of the house and had been drug out the window, it appears,
Oh.
and axe wound to the head. and she was still alive. Now,
Oh,
Moses says that he saw somebody running away, and he said, "You killed my wife, you bastard," or something like that.
yeah.
And neighbors heard him yelling. They came over there, and within 15 minutes, there's 200 people on property.
Oh my
Everybody
God.
has converged on Susan Hancock's house and are walking all through the yard. They're coming in the house. You know, when you see those old movies where somebody's hurt or something and people are coming in people's house and like staring at them and stuff and looking, I always
Oh,
thought that was acting. It's not acting. That's what people will do.
oh, I know. And they'll just
They'll
like
just
stomp
come
through the crime scene.
inside your house to look because they want to see. They're just clamoring. And
I know.
it's bizarre. Yeah. Um,
Oh,
So that's what's going on at Susan's house. And this is going on. They call the doctors and everybody's there and the cops are all there. And all of a sudden, some bells start ringing again. There's another dead woman right up the street,
oh,
about 6 to 9 blocks up the street.
oh my
Guys
God.
jump on their horses, run up there, and Eula Phillips is laying there, hacked up. And Eula was a beautiful girl. She was a young girl. She was a promiscuous girl.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say that, but that she was.
Yeah.
And so her husband, James Phillips, was
Okay.
on scene as well and had a horrific axe wound to his head. Didn't crush it,
Okay.
didn't break his skull, but it cut him really bad.
Okay.
So out of those investigations, who do the cops arrest? Moses Hancock
Okay.
and James Phillips, the husbands, right? They did
Uh,
not even correlate it to all the black women that had been dying
yeah.
because you just don't. I don't know. I don't know what.
Well, I don't know if they thought in their mind because now I'm assuming that during the ones when he was murdering African American women at the time, did they think was this guy a black man as well? Because I know Nathan Elgin is black, and you
Yes.
believe that he could possibly have done some of them, but it's
Yep.
like switching that MO from going from African American women to Caucasian women. The only correlation I see in the that's the same as the age. He seemed to
Yep.
really keep them young, and I'm wondering if the one victim she slept in her daughter's bed because her husband was drunk. So he went into the room thinking it was a little girl's room, thinking it was a little girl in bed and not an
Hmm.
adult woman. I mean, that could have very well been like
Could
because
have
if
been.
I'm assuming back then little girls had dolls everywhere and little frilly things and stuff. So walking in a room, you see a body in a bed, you are gonna assume it's a child when there's like unicorns everywhere. Because it's not normal for an adult woman to have like plushy stuff all over her
Right.
bed and stuffed animals. And so that could have very well been that he thought it was a child in that bed and found out it was a woman, grown woman. But yeah, I see the correlation between even though he jumped races, that they're all still very young. Not even some of them, not even women yet. I mean, 11
Right.
years old, that's
Yeah.
a little girl.
Mary. Yeah. As far as Eula Phillips,
Mhm.
um, she was very young, 17, had a kid. Um, she had a little bit of a checkered past, so they needed to get her married off as quick as they could, and they married her off to James Phillips, who was drank quite a bit. They didn't get along.
Mhm.
She had left the house a few times, stayed with other people. This particular night, poor Eula Phillips was actually at an assignation house down the street. An
Oh,
assignation house
okay.
is a place where a couple can go, and the people that own the house don't tell anybody that they're having relations at that house. So, Eula Phillips, I'm going to take you back in a little bit of a history lesson real quick.
Yeah.
Let's go.
I don't
Let's
know.
go back. 1884 is
Okay.
only less than a decade after the Civil War ended.
Okay.
General George Custer actually was the one that came into Austin for the Reconstruction and trying to get everybody back on board with the United States. Him and his men
Okay.
were camped out at Shoal Creek. And so there was a lot of tension, right? In politics.
Mhm.
If you were a Confederate officer or supported the Confederacy, you couldn't run for public office. You couldn't represent the Confederacy. So a bunch of these folks switched over and called themselves other things like Grangers or, like Republicans, Democrats, whatever. Grangers
Mhm.
were the Farmers Party, right? Well,
Okay.
basically after Custer left,
Mhm.
the old Confederacy just took over everything again in politics, right? That's what it was.
Yeah.
And they supported 100% the red light district in Austin called Boys Town, which
Okay.
is about 3 square blocks down there, 3 to 6 square blocks downtown Austin, which was the red light district. And the legislature, yes, your political heroes are the ones that supported all of that and continue to this day. Um,
Really?
ugh, horrible people. And so Eula,
Okay.
beautiful young woman,
Mhm.
um, was very popular at the legislature. And there were
Okay.
several legislators, congressmen, that were
Mhm.
entertaining Eula. And that night she was being entertained by someone, but May Tobin was the one that ran the assignation house. She didn't have any rooms that night. After all, it's Christmas Eve. People are
Okay.
busy. People are busy,
Yes.
right?
Right.
Yeah. So they sent her away. We don't know what happened between the time she left the assignation house and she got home, but she got home, and shortly after that, within an hour, someone walked into their house, whacked Jimmy over the head, whacked Eula over the head, picked up an apple and gave it to her little boy to eat because he was crying. Eat the apple, little boy, and then drug the little boy's mama out into the yard under the moonlight and had his way with her. That
Mhm.
location today is actually in a parking garage, a Travis County um, parking garage. And the house that was behind the house that the Phillips lived in is still standing. I think it's owned by Texas A&M University, actually. So
Oh,
that alley
really?
is still there. Yeah, that alley is still there.
Oh, I'll
And
definitely have to look that up.
I've been there many times, and um, Eula was a very free spirit. I don't know if I would say a troublesome girl, but she
Mhm.
definitely did not feel like she was getting her just rewards and was going out being an affirmative young woman in this atmosphere that she was given. And this
Right. And,
happened to her. Yeah.
yeah,
And by
and
the way, May Tobin,
okay.
the assignation house was run by Black women.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was very rare to have a white woman there, which would lead you to believe that if Nathan Elgin is running around looking for black women and he's kind of walking along and he sees her leaving there, that would be a reason why he would see her leaving and then maybe follow her. Or just
Okay.
randomly walking down the street and see her get dropped off by the hack, a taxi, like a
Yeah.
stagecoach, not a taxi. The hack dropped her off at her house, and maybe he just followed her in then. We don't
Mhm.
know. But
Right.
there is if I'm looking at crime scene stuff and chances, that's more likely what would have happened. He would have seen her at the assignation house and then gone from there, as opposed
Okay.
to just randomly happen to be at her house when she gets home from doing that. You know,
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
Yeah, so it's kinda hard, yeah, especially when you don't have the physical evidence that they find at crime scenes today, and having the technology to apply it to the evidence so you can get a result of what actually happened. Because the only thing I mean, in Austin, it doesn't snow very often, but,
Nope.
would they think of obviously footprints in the snow would have been very, very important. And if people are walking all over the crime
Yeah.
scenes and stepping in blood, and it's gonna, yeah, really gonna be hard to pin down who actually did it. But it almost feels like it has to be somebody that can blend in, that is maybe because I don't see how he could stay in this town and not be seen by somebody, or some way given some type of like a something like a tick he does, or something that would
Right.
trigger somebody to be like, "You were the guy that, hacked me on the head a year ago." Something. I mean, there had to have been something. Now, we do
Right.
have to take a quick break, but there is another serial killer that they kind of compared the two, that happened shortly. It was after, because in the Jack the Ripper was in
87.
87. Okay. Yeah, I was trying to
Or
remember what
18,
year it was.
well, 1888.
1888. Okay.
Yeah.
So he has ties to that. So when we come back for break, we're going to discuss those theories and how maybe the Midnight Assassin decided to hop on a boat and go over the pond to London. And maybe, just maybe, there might be some ties there. So we'll see you in a bit.
Oh, my little darklings. Theater of the Mind, Tales from the Darkness is out, and it's available right now. And I would love for you to pick up a copy of my brand new book. You can get it on Amazon wherever you live in this great, big, wonderful world of ours. Or if you'd like to get an autographed copy and you live here in the United States, go to paranormal60.com. We have the standard copy, non-autographed, just $20. Signed copy, only $30. And not only do we have this book, but we have my other book, The Other Side. And right now I'm running a special. If you pick up both books, you can get both books for $40, both signed. Both will be shipped in one package for one price. So go check out all the information at paranormal60.com. The Other Side, A Teen's Guide to Ghost Hunting and the Paranormal, which is a guide on ghost hunting and the paranormal. Or you can get Theater of the Mind, Tales from the Darkness, real life encounters with the supernatural. And not only are they some of my all-time favorite stories from you, but there's a few of my favorite stories that have happened to me in the book as well. So go check it out, paranormal60.com, to order your copies, or you can buy copies wherever you are in the world that are unsigned at amazon.com. And I'll ask you this. Many of you have supported me in buying this book already. If you could just take 30 seconds to rate and review this book on Goodreads or on amazon.com, I would greatly appreciate it, because the more we get of good ratings and reviews, the more they expose this book to a wider, bigger audience. So I would appreciate that as a personal favor to me, your pal, Dave Schrader.
Okay, and we're back. So we kind of alluded before the break that we're going to see about how they can tie the Midnight Assassin to Jack the Ripper, and we got Greg Lawson here, the paranormal detective, to kind of go over that information, because he is an expert on this. And hopefully, you said you would like to do a documentary, a book on this. I think it'd be very fascinating to find an actual book, especially with modern day thought processes on how to, because back then everything was so sensationalized. You can, as a police officer and being in law enforcement, you know how to kind of piece together the information to make it more factual versus putting bias in your opinion into the piece as well. So it's more like a police report than it would have any type of no emotions. But one thing I do want to mention real quick, and I did do a video the other day. I am wearing a baseball cap. I have to tell you guys this. These are EMF Faraday hats. Now, every day we're bombarded with cell phone signals and Wi-Fi and all this stuff. And is it making an impact on our health? Is it interfering with our neurological, triggers? Is it causing impairments? And so with me having all the health issues I have like cognitive issues because I deal with extreme fatigue and brain fog as well. And Dave bought these hats for us to try out. And I have been wearing my hat now nonstop. And I feel more focused in front of a computer now. I don't just look at my computer screen and think it's all like written in Klingon and I can't understand what I'm reading. This really works. Greg, the tinfoil hat, there was something to it. They just
Oh,
make it a little bit more fashionable. But yeah, it's lined. It's a Faraday hat. It
Um,
protects you from EMF interference, and I really think there is something to it. So if you guys are interested, I'll have a my link in today's description for this hat. I'll make sure that I'll label it so it's for the Faraday hat. But yeah, check it out. Um, people with migraines, chronic migraines, try it out. You can always return if it doesn't work for you. But I'm saying yes, this is making a huge difference in my life in just the week that I've been wearing it. And they also make like clothing, like you can get a full Faraday outfit to protect every part of your body.
it's like a
It,
shark
it's
suit.
yeah, it's pretty cool. But yeah, so if you guys are interested, and I will be putting today's links. Greg, your website is theparanormaldetective.com. I will put that in today's program guide as well. So okay, so Jack the Ripper. So
Jack the Ripper.
the Midnight Assassin goes from 1884 to 1885 in Austin. So the Ripper starts 1888 over in London. Now, is there any record for anybody from Austin hopping on a ship at that time and going over there that they kind of looked at as a suspect prior? Did they even look at that? The records of, because they would have all those records of people on ships going over. So I don't know, was there anything done with that, or is that something you might want to start digging in to see? Maybe there might be a couple names that might look on the list that look familiar to you as you've been doing the research on this serial killer.
So the answer is yes. Yeah.
Oh,
So let me
really?
look at I'm going to read something. October 1888, an editor in the
Okay.
Atlanta Constitution postulated that the two killers, the Austin Midnight Assassin and Jack the Ripper, could be one and the same. So what ended up happening
Oh,
is
okay.
there's a thing called Fourth Amendment, and it requires you to have probable cause to arrest somebody. Yeah, we didn't
Right.
really pay that much attention. Law enforcement didn't pay that much attention to that in 1884. If we
No.
wanted to talk to you, we were going to come talk to you and grab you
Right.
and drag you and take you to jail, throw you in jail.
Mhm.
If we're going to be civil, we would talk with you, with witnesses there, hopefully,
Mhm.
and get your story. Then
Mhm.
that would go to a judge, and the judge would determine whether we're going to hold you longer or whether you're going to be released. If you were black, they would get you, take you to jail,
Mhm.
beat you up, try to
Right.
force you to confess. You didn't confess, kept you a little bit longer. That didn't work. Goes to the judge. The judge would release you. So that's what ended up happening with Spencer.
Okay.
They took him to jail. They roughed him up pretty good, and he never confessed, and they ended up releasing him. She had an old boyfriend, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes down that way. When
Mhm.
we're looking at what was happening, there was a particular cook in Austin, not Nathan Elgin, another one
Okay.
only known as the Malay cook or possibly Maurice. And he
Okay.
worked at one of the restaurants downtown. And he found out the cops wanted to talk to him. Well, he
Oh.
skedaddled in Boston. He wasn't having any of that. And
Oh.
ended up, taking off. And he goes to Galveston and hires on as a cook to a ship that just so happens to be bound for London.
Okay. All right. There it is. Okay.
So, um,
Okay.
and when we're talking about a ship, I envision like a cruise ship that he's going on. Well, it's 1884.
Yeah, it's not.
It was
I
probably
mean,
not a cruise ship. It's probably
yeah, it's not first class dining.
yeah. Do we know whether it went straight to London or whether, you're going to stop off in Miami, stop off in New York, stop off in Nova Scotia, where are you going on the
Mhm.
way there? So that was a little flaky, but that was something that they really talked about. And
Okay.
um, during the Jack the Ripper murders, they actually specifically looked for this guy. They tracked him. They were like,
Oh.
"Hey, there was these murders happening in Austin, Texas, a few years ago. And this one guy that they were looking for actually jumped ship and went to London. That was publicized. So they're like, all right,
really?
well, what about the Americans that were there in Austin at the time that ended up in London at the time of the Jack the Ripper murders, which would have been just about everybody from Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. So Buffalo Bill's Wild West show was there, and then it ended up in London. So they focused in on a guy named Buck Taylor, who actually came from Fredericksburg, Texas. That's about 70 miles from Austin. However, they never were able to make any kind of connections. They never located Maurice or the Malay cook or whoever this guy was to interview him. He just kind of went off into obscurity, I guess. But yeah, so that was part of that. And there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people that try to relate or connect Jack the Ripper with other things that have happened here in the United States and over in Europe. So there's all these connections. The newspapers and Scotland Yard did a incredible job at getting the information out, right?
Yes.
Of what happened. And so it intrigued a lot of people. The same thing happened with the servant girl murders. It's just kind of, it turned back page as soon as the American reading public, which is primarily white, would read that they were of African descent. They would shrug their shoulders and go, that's a black problem. They need to handle their problem. And that's kind of the way they handled it here in Austin. They felt that it was gangs that were doing just random murders. They were different people. And because it was primarily in these servant girls and with black women, African-American women, that they just kind of went, well, they need to take care of that. They actually hired a couple of black men to be on the police department. They weren't allowed to carry guns, but they were to handle any issues in the black run neighborhoods. At that time, this is crazy. Listen to this. There were more black African American owned businesses in 1884 in Austin, Texas than there are today. There you go.
What?
Yeah. It was segregated. So they had to have their own grocery stores. They had to have their own liveries. They had to have their own hotels. They had to have all their own stuff. And that's what they did. And there were very, very prominent citizens in Austin that were black, that were running big businesses. And whether you want to throw conspiracy theory with your Faraday hat on or not, I'm sure some of these Grangers and some of these other white men were going, wow, look at all the money they're making. We need to have some of that money. Let's change this and allow them to have these businesses. So,
And even with my own family, my mom had personal experience because my mom grew up in Maxton, North Carolina, which is just right on the border of North Carolina and South Carolina. And my grandfather was the constable of the town, and he was the officer that would assess the black community because the other white officers wouldn't. So my grandfather, being the Christian soul that he was such a giver and he just loved humans and loved people. He said, okay, I'll step up. I'll be the constable. So my grandfather was actually the one that was policing the black community there in Maxton. And of course, the KKK did not like my family doing that. So they ended up having to move out of Maxton because it got so bad. The KKK ran my family out of town, and they ended up in Greenville, North Carolina, which was a little bit more liberal when it came to racial rights. And, it seemed like it was a little less rigid and divisive there. I mean, they were segregated, but it didn't have that, feel like you got to look over your shoulder. Somebody's going to stab you in the back if you do, you know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, it's a weird dichotomy. And the African American community with all these murders, they just got put on the back page. It's like, it's their problem. They need to handle it. We don't need to get in their business. So It's unfortunate that that was the case, but with everything that you've looked at now and researched, and you said you eventually could do a project with this. What's kind of your conclusion, or do you not want to fully give your conclusion? Do you want to release anything that you might be alluding to, or you want to hold off?
Already have, but you'd have to dissect that. So what I am holding on to is truly that valuable for me to not release it. I'm going to do it in a series of books.
Okay.
I have the first one about half written, I guess. The
Okay.
good thing is I'm working with a very prominent, well-known author of
Okay.
fiction, actually, and so I'm doing what would be called historical fiction or creative nonfiction. It depends
Okay.
on
Well, those
how you want to define that, right?
Yeah, I love those because it gives a human feel
Yeah.
to it. You're taking facts and it's just like, and we've had actually an author on before with the same thing. He wrote a book, and it was about Jack the Ripper. The Unwelcomed, I think, or was it The Unwanted? I always got the two titles confused. But yeah, that's exactly what he did. Or like the movie Titanic, you take a
Yeah.
fictional storyline and place it in a real historical event. But I think those are important. I really think too, I think that's a better way for young adults to learn about history as
I
well.
agree. I agree.
Yeah.
And to stay true to the story, you take the facts and you string the facts all the way through the book, and then you have your character do things that people would normally do: eat ice cream
Mhm.
at the ice cream parlor, go to the restaurant, go to the theater, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
It kind of
Right.
brings a story along, and you base it
Mhm.
on somebody else that could be real, uh,
Mhm.
and uh, and the only reason I'm doing that is because I'll say it again, man. The Midnight Assassin by Skip Hollandsworth is a fantastic book. If you ever want to know what it was like living in 1884 in Austin, Texas, that is the book to get. He is a fantastic author. He works for Texas Monthly Magazine, and he does a lot of
Okay.
their stuff. He's a fantastic writer.
Yeah,
And
I'll
and I
definitely find out the book and get the link in our description guide for that because I wanna read it, that's for sure.
yeah, I do not feel I could do anything better than what
Okay.
he did. Um, his research is absolutely stellar. It's on point. He missed a couple of things. Hmm, hmm,
But you're gonna
but
get those in there with your
oh
books.
man.
Look at it. We're
Uh,
leaving this totally on a cliffhanger, but yeah, I'm definitely put a link for his
yeah,
book in today's description. Well, thank you so much, Greg, for taking the time and sitting with me today and talking about this. I had no clue. When Dave told me about, oh yeah, the Servant Girl Annihilator, I'm like, what? And I looked it up. I'm like, who is this and why have I not heard about it? So,
yep,
and your
you
website
know that.
again is theparanormaldetective.com, and you have a slew of books. I mean, you have a Mothman book, you've done UFO books, you've done cryptid books and ghost books, but have do you have any specific true crime books? Or are you still kind of, or do you have any that are kind of, paranormal with a true crime twist?
So because of my job for 32 years, it's kind of a conflict of interest, and it would violate some
Gotcha.
of my policies to have been able to
Mhm.
write a real true crime book. I wrote two books, one called The Disorient Express, and one called The Carrion, which is like
Yeah.
rotten meat on the side of the road, Carrion. Bad
Mhm.
title. I'll take that one. That was a bad title. Nobody's like, carry on, like luggage. No, carry on, carry on. Yeah,
That
like a
luggage.
bag. Like you can only take 3 bags on the plane now. One to put
It's your
under the
carry-on.
bed, and yeah, a bag. I'm like, oh my god. So anyway, and those are true stories. You guys are gonna call me a liar, but if anybody reads it, those are true stories that I then wove into a a fictional tapestry. I did not
Okay.
make any of that stuff up. That happened. I changed the names and the locations.
Okay.
of
I'll
the
put
thing.
links
So,
for those as well.
yeah, those are
Yeah, because
the Carrion and the Disorient Express. But yeah, as far as true crime, it's coming.
okay, awesome. Well, again, the website is theparanormaldetective.com. It'll be in today's description guide. Thank you so much, Greg, and we look forward to having you here in the future, especially when you start writing these books on the Midnight Assassin. And like I said, I will have a link for the Midnight Assassin book in today's program guide, and I will let you guys know as soon as Greg starts pumping out those books. We'll definitely have you back on, and we'll kind of go over it again and see what other new details that you may have covered with even more research that you do.
Look forward to it. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.